Really good. People came in very quickly tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. My name is Regina Farrell-Fagan. I am the exhibitions manager at Clay Arts Centre. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're very excited to have Earlene Cox with us tonight. Earlene is an emerging artist, and she is a Clay Arts Centre artist member, as well as serving on our board. So we're very excited to listen to Earlene tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about Clay Arts Centre. We are a nationally recognized nonprofit organization for the ceramic arts. I'm just going to share my screen with you. We're located in Portchester, which is about 20 miles north, little over 20 miles north of Manhattan. And let me just play with this. There we go. Our mission at Clay Arts Centre is believing strongly that the arts have the ability to touch and enrich lives. Clay Arts Centre offer a stimulating space for studio practice, exhibition, and educational opportunities to better serve the community. So Earlene is ready to go. Earlene, I'm going to hand it over to you. When you're ready, you can start sharing your screen. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Regina, for that introduction. You probably noticed, if you read my bio, that I am a slightly different kind of artist. I call myself a transitional artist, and I call myself that because I didn't start off in life wanting to be an artist. I wanted to be a lawyer. And while I still practice a little law, nothing makes me happier. Nothing makes me happier than to get my hands in some dirt. So I started to do art because I was trying to save myself. My mother had Alzheimer's, and I watched her be consumed by this disease. And one of the things that happens when you've watched someone be consumed by Alzheimer's is that you worry every day about, do you have it and is it going to impact you? And one of the things that you do quite often is you say to yourself, now wait, do I know where I am? And do I know why I'm here? And the big question is, do I know who I am? So it's easy to answer the first two, but the more I thought about who I am, the more I realized that that's a more difficult question to answer if you decide that you're going to answer it with any depth. I realized that to answer it, you really had to look at your life experiences, you had to look at your parents, you had to look at your ancestry. And so this evening, what I want to share with you is my journey to answer the question of who I am. And getting to the answer is going to require that I do a little looking at America and how I got here. So if I can get this to come up now, do I click PowerPoint?
Yeah, you should be able to click PowerPoint. There you go.
Okay, so the first thing I need to do is just say, most of the time, who you are, who you actually are, you get more from your non-bio than your bio. So I want to share with you my non-bio information that was very important in who I am. So the first thing, and I think most people don't know this, is I grew up on a farm in a rural beach town in southeast North Carolina. I lived with my parents. I had 6 siblings, 5 brothers and a sister. And during hard times, my father would have us go and work for white farmers. And I will tell you that was not a very pleasant experience. But my parents were also political activists. And they did things like sit-ins, and they were very practical. They said, listen, you guys are gonna go with us. So my sister and brother actually did a sit-in to integrate a restaurant. When I was about 14, the schools opened up under a freedom of choice plan. And of course, my father said, you're going. So I, along with 2 of my younger brothers, actually went to the white school, and we integrated it. It was absolutely the worst year of my life. We had to ride the bus 7 miles, the three of us, on a bus with a busload of white kids. And I can say I have never, ever in my life experienced the hatefulness and cruelty that we were subjected to. And I left that whole experience asking myself the question you see on the bottom. How can white people who do not know me be so hateful and cruel and be so wrong about who I am? So this first experience with racism didn't prepare me for the fact that I would have to live with this every day. So one of the things about being an African American in this country is that we live with perceptions, inequities, and pain that is constantly, we're constantly subjected to it. And what I want to tell you is when I started to do art, I realized how much all these experiences had also shaped what I ended up doing in art. So I'm going to tell you a story tonight, and I'm going to tell it as I see it. And I think James Baldwin, who was an activist and a writer, summed it up best. He said, all artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole story, to vomit the anguish up. So this year has been just an absolutely crazy year. We've had a pandemic. The pandemic showed up all kinds of disparities when it comes to health and economics between African Americans and whites. We've had natural disasters. We've had social unrest and protests. And mostly we've been watching what this country's response is. So people refer to it as an inflection point. And why is it an inflection point? Because globally, the whole world is looking at the United States and trying to understand what we're doing. And at this point, we have to decide who we are as a country. And we know who we are as a country, but the bigger question is, what do we want to be as a country? So I thought a good place to start this discussion is with the 1619 Project. And this was the intro page for that project, which came out in 2019. And the one line in this that really caught my attention was the sentence in the middle of this that says, America was not yet America, but this was the moment it began. And this quote, I think, defined what they were trying to say. Basically, it says that out of slavery and the anti-Black racism it required grew nearly everything that has truly made America exceptional. Now, they listed about 8 different things, but the 4 things that my art will touch on tonight is economics, violence, inequality, and the legal system. And the other piece of it is the endemic racial fears and hatreds that continue to plague America today. So the first part of answering who I am is how I came to be in America as opposed to Africa. My ancestors didn't immigrate here. They didn't leave a country fleeing from persecution, and they certainly didn't voluntarily come here. We were kidnapped, stolen. And our history of that having happened is like nobody else's history in the United States. Now, this map, some of you are probably sitting here counting stars and looking at stripes. It is not a perfect map. It is a map that I one day took out a piece of clay, rolled it out, took a penknife and simply cut it out from memory. I then started to put stars on it, ran out of space with the stars, and none of that bothered me because what I thought was the United States is an imperfect union. And so here's your imperfect map to go with it. So I've decided, and by the way, I don't start in the United States. My ancestors don't start in the United States. One story I want to tell you is that when my kids were in elementary school in Armonk, New York, the teachers used to give them an assignment, which was trace your ancestry back to your, country of origin. I hated that project, and I think my kids hated that project because, how far can you get if you happen to be an African American whose descendants were kidnapped and brought to this country? And don't think those genetic tests are going to get you there, because what will happen is it'll tell you some region of Africa that you came from. And then in my case, all of a sudden, all these European genes start to pop up, and who knows the answer to that? That's part of the legacy, of slavery. So I just want to tell you, I dream of another land. I dream of Africa. And this is a sculpture that I did after I had visited Egypt and had met the Nubian people. And I just tell you, it's made out of chocolate clay, and that is actually a cotton shawl that is around the head of it, decoupaged on. I dream of African queens, beautiful, stately women who were wonderful human beings in Africa. This bust is life size. I started doing this age bonded bronze process because I wanted things to look old. And it's a wonderful process. You'll see as I show you some of the other pieces of art that I quite often will use it when I want to make something look aged. I also dream of young African girls with their braids who will someday become queens. And again, this piece, I again use the age bonded bronze process. I can't have the dream of coming from Africa without having the nightmare that comes along with realizing that people showed up in Africa and stole my ancestors. They stole the strongest of them, and they wrapped them in chains, and they took them away. And one day I was sitting and thinking about that, and I sculpted this piece, and I put the chains on. It's sculpted out of porcelain, which a lot of people say is crazy because porcelain is very hard to sculpt with. But I sculpted it out of porcelain and put the chains on, and I kept looking at it and thinking they ought to be rusted. So I used a rusted bonded steel to give this rusted effect. And you'll see as I show you other pieces that I will regularly use rust. One of the things that I always wondered about was for the people that were left in Africa when we were stolen, what did they think? Where did they think their loved ones went? And so this piece is called The King, and I sculpted it again out of porcelain, and I wanted to create a king that's looking and saying, where did they go? And I tried to figure out how could I make it have a more African feel. And I came up with this idea to use a cedar slab. And I love this cedar slab because this particular piece had a hole in it, which, you know, I used because, you know, I felt like it looked like a thought bubble. Our ancestors were shackled, and I wanted to know what it looked and felt like a shackle. So I went out and I researched what a shackle looked like, and I sculpted it. And then I did an actual cast of my hand. So this is actually a life-size cast of my hand. And the plan was to put the shackles on the hand. But unfortunately, I could not bring my heart and soul to do it. So this piece ended up with a shackle on the side and a hand. The process of getting us, our ancestors, from Africa to the United States, you know, was a shipping operation. And when I think about this, I see the anguish of being chained, shackled in the bottom of a ship going across the ocean. I sculpted this piece after I had visited the Smithsonian's African American Museum of History and Culture. And if you haven't been there, you really should go. But I couldn't bring myself to sculpt a slave ship, but I wanted to create this impression of being locked in. And again, I went to the cedar slab, which allowed me to create this box and put this person in it with them looking upward. 12.5 million Africans came through and were shipped from Africa. Once they were on the ocean, the bad news started. And of those 12.5 million Africans that were shipped, 2 million of them died. How do we know they died? Because we were treated as property, we were listed with insurance companies, and we were documented as property. So when a slave died, you know, they filed an insurance claim. So when you go to the Smithsonian Museum, you know, you see the records, and that's the records that show the claims that got made for the number of slaves that died. There is actually one ship, and I don't recall how many Africans it left with, but when it landed in America, only one was alive. But we were fortunate enough to make it through that middle passage. I see the horrible life that awaited my ancestors here. They were shackled, they were given just the most inhumane treatment, and they worked until they died raising tobacco and cotton. And by the way, I mentioned that I grew up on this farm. It was tobacco farming. So this piece, I actually sculpted it in 2015, and it sat in my studio mocking me for quite a while. I finally looked at the shackles and said, oh, they need rust. So I rusted them. And then they sat for another 2 years. And then one day in the fall of 2019, I was having this conversation with my friend Sally, and she pointed out to me that the problem with them is, the problem with the hands is they're not dirty. And so I proceeded to use an underglaze and make the hands dirty. These hands, when I sculpted them, I used my hands as the model. So when you look at the inside of these hands, they have my lifelines. And I like to think they are the lifelines that take me all the way back to Africa. One of the craziest things that I thought happened in slavery was that slave owners said we weren't human, that we were less than human, and they treated us that way. But yet, we have so much of their genes in our systems because they would rape my ancestors. So think about that. You say that I'm not human, but yet you violate me. I created this, I love doing backs. And so I created this piece, and what makes me feel good about it is that I love the back. It does have a front, but I'm really partial to the back. This was the first time I sculpted a human figure using a model. So I did a series that's called Reparations. And I want to talk just a minute and say, art has a responsibility about history. African Americans were done a great disservice during slavery, because a part of how you carry on this image that we were inhuman is by doing art that depicted us that way. And in the ceramic world then, they would do these jugs called slave jugs, and they would put these horrible distorted, black slave sculptures on them. Well, I decided that I wanted to do something and show how bad that was. So I did a series, it's called Reparations. Really, it's about, let me repair this image you have of us. And there were 4 pieces to the series. I actually went out and researched what a slave jug looked like. I made it, I fired it, I glazed it, and then I took a hammer and I broke it into 1,000 pieces and threw it in the trash can, because I decided I couldn't put that into the universe. So these, I'm going to show you 2 of the slave women that I sculpted, because I wanted to say, if we had done this ourselves, this is how we would have looked. And they were sculpted out of paper clay and colored with underglaze. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And I, with this piece, just wanted to say, we thought we had victory. And this was to show how we must have been rejoicing. And I think probably for some slaves, this was kind of confusing to suddenly be on your own. But there was also another problem that, a lot of slaves did not find out that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed until much later. And that's why you hear people talk about Juneteenth. That's a date when most of the slaves knew that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. And this piece was sculpted with the mid-fire clay with underglaze. Funny thing about laws, you can put them into place, but how they get administered is a whole different thing. So laws are one thing, but actually achieving equality is another. And I did this piece sculpted out of black clay to show we're still trying to get our arms around equality. And it's called Equality Denied. One of the things that I dream of is the terror that came once we were free. There was lots of intimidation, there were lynchings, terror groups formed, and the systemic kind of terror that continues today was started shortly after we were supposedly freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. I sculpted this piece. It's called Hidden, and I deliberately used a tree pattern on it because I wanted it to have hints of lynching, but I could not sculpt that. It's not in my being. There's a quote in 1619 that states, "Slavery gave America a fear of Black people and a taste for violent punishment. Both still define the US criminal justice system." Starting shortly after slavery, Black code laws were put into place, and stupid laws were put into place that if you were found standing on the corner, you could be, charged as a vagrant and you would go to jail. Well, this was actually the beginning of the prison industrial complex, because what would happen is you would get jailed, but then they would lease you back out to the farms. So that in effect, we were enslaved again. I looked up because I just wanted to be clear about how they define prison industrial complex. And basically it states that it's when the overlapping interests of government and industry to use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment to solution economic, social, and political problems. And if that doesn't describe what is still going on today, I don't know what does. This sculpture I wanted to show a young Black person behind bars, the despair that comes with that. And again, for some reason that I'm not clear about, the bars had to be rusted. My son asked me once what the rusting was about, and I told him I think it had something to do with what metal does when it's got to cross the ocean and water touches it and it corrodes. So this next slide goes to economics. I sculpted it when I saw a homeless guy one day. He was injured, he was dirty, and he was surrounded by garbage. And I wondered how he had gotten there. And when I gave it a lot of thought, I realized it's all about the wealth gap. And the wealth gap was caused by discrimination in employment, housing, and education. And the other thought I had was, there but for the grace of God go I. On February 26, 2012, a teenager named Travon Martin was killed for being Black and being in a neighborhood that someone thought he didn't look like he belonged in. I can tell you, I and every mother of a Black child in this country saw their worst nightmare come through. A shudder, I'm sure, went through all of us because we looked at it and knew this could have been our son. I sculpted this out of raku clay, and I had never taken a sculpture and tried to do a raku glaze on it. When it first came out, I thought, well, it looks a little strange, but then I grew to like it because it looks surreal. And in effect, that's what this killing felt like too. So we all know as African Americans that we at a very early age, because of this country, because of the history, because of all the things I've talked about, that we have to try to alert our kids to how to stay safe. So we call it The Talk, and where we sit our kids down and we start to talk about the dangers of being Black in America. What do you do when you are stopped by a policeman? Just things of that nature that are survival things. So this year, I started something called Conversations in Black. It's a series. And in this series, the pieces move around. And I like to listen to people who look at it, tell me what they think the conversation is. So I'm doing these out of paper clay and underglaze, and whatever you're reading into it has to do with the positioning of the bodies and the places where they are, because none of them have faces. So 2020, a recent article I read described 2020 in this way. It says, in the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and others named and unnamed, a great uprising for Black lives has swept the nation and the world, inciting a new urgency and radical possibilities for advancing abolitionist practice and uprooting institutional racism. I hope this is true. I created this as a tribute to the Black Lives Matter movement. It's made out of paper clay and underglaze. So where do we land here? We carry our history. This country carries its history. Our history becomes a part of the fabric of who we are. And that's true whether you were the oppressor or the oppressed. And this country's enslavement of a race of people colors what takes place in America today. And this is what I call America's enduring burden. History is not just in the past, it's also the present. Do you remember that map that was not drawn perfectly? Well, it's actually a part of this exhibit that I call The Enduring Burden of Slavery. It's a history book that sits on top of the American flag, that has a white porcelain hand on top with a gold bracelet symbolizing white privilege, and a Black hand symbolizing all that still goes on in this country that does not allow us to have equality. Why is this important? Because by acknowledging this history and trying to understand how it's influencing what we do today, there's a chance we can try to change the future. So back to that question about who I am. I'm Black, I'm beautiful, I'm smart, I'm strong, I'm proud, and I was made that way because of the shoulders of my ancestors on which I stand. They were stolen, they survived the Middle Passage, they endured unthinkable horrors during slavery, they fell for the lies of emancipation, and we are still bearing systemic racism now. I carry all of that history, but I'm much more than that history, and I think all of us are. And about that Alzheimer's, my attitude is, if it comes for me, it's in for a fight. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Earlene. That was really, really wonderful. I'm going to open up to take questions now. You can stop sharing your screen, Earlene. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do want to read something out here. This is a message to you from Morris Cox. She is considered an emerging artist, but she is so much more than that. I see that every day. What a lovely message from Morris.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you from Baltimore Clayworks. Thank you, Baltimore Clayworks, for joining us tonight. Awesome presentation, Earlene. So proud of you. That came from Michelle Adkins. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I would invite you at this time. You can use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you and let you ask Earlene a question. Or if you have a comment you'd like to type in. Okay, let's see. From Emily, do you have any ideas for what you want to create next?
Do I have any ideas for what I want to create next? I'm actually working on that Conversations in Black, and I actually have several pieces that I've already made. So that's one thing I'm working on. But I'm also working on a series called The Faces of COVID. And basically it's going to be 4 faces. One that shows the reaction when we first heard of this. The second, when we realized how bad it was. And it's kind of like a decision tree. So you've got those 2 things. And then you had a choice. You could wear a mask or die. And so the third one that I've done is a sculpture that has a mask over the face. And the fourth one, I haven't quite been able to do yet because again, I use my face, my features to sculpture this stuff. And there's something a little hinky about the idea that I'm gonna sculpt myself dead. So I haven't done that one yet, but those are the 2 things that I'm working on right now. But I'm really excited about my Conversations in Peace series, in Conversations in Black series.
Okay, thank you, Earlene. I'm going to open up a live question here with Ken Creary. So Ken, I'm going to open your microphone. Just give me a second.
Hi, Ken.
Just,
Hey, it was just Lauren messing with the mic, I think. But it was a great
Lauren,
show.
quit.
I'm sorry, Earlene.
It's okay. Hi, guys.
Great show. I loved it.
Thank you.
Such a beautiful way to tell the story, too.
Thank you.
Maybe Ken will fix it.
Did you guys have a question or was it just you wanted to make a comment?
For doing such a beautiful job and showing us again her gorgeous art.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just going to have a couple of comments here. I'll read out to you. Oh, I see Q&A down here too. Okay. From Al, as a North Carolina native, I find the work that incorporates this part of your background especially evocative. Do you have plans to do more?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Nice, simple answer. David asked, said, enjoyed your presentation, very moving. Why do you prefer doing series?
It's kind of like you get stuck on something, and it's not a bad getting stuck. It's that my mind, creative mind, go to a certain place, and then you know, you stay there for a while, and you just create pieces within that, and then one day I'll just go, I don't want to do this anymore, and move to the next thing. So I tend to do things in 3, and don't know why I do that, but this series, Conversations in Black, you know, I see myself doing it for a while, just because you just move the pieces around and you create a whole different storyline, and I'm enjoying it.
Thank you, Arlene. I'm going to open up the microphone for Emma Porter. Emma, if you can open up your microphone.
Yes. Hi, Earlene. A wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think this should be put in a book. Are you planning on maybe documenting this series?
No. Thank you, but no.
You should. You really should.
I have to say that when I agreed to do this for Regina, I sat and I said, I don't think I have enough art. And then I started to put it together and think, you know, it actually was a good exercise for me because it made me take all my artwork and put it together and realize that this is what I had been doing. So it actually kind of surprised me that all of this had actually impacted what I create, you know, so much.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Emma. Let me just see. I had a couple. Somebody asked, are your pieces to sell or for personal collection? Arlene's work is available online at Clay Art Center website. So if you visit our shop after we finish, you can find some of her work for sale there. This is a message from Anne. Arlene, my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 57. Thank you for sharing your powerful words. We are strong, powerful women. We will change our world. Black folk have so many stories to tell. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sally Eng asked, what message or advice would you like to give young Black artists?
Young Black artists. I can only tell you because I entered this at such a late point in life that and really did not have the educational background or, you know, the knowledge to know what you do once you do it. So I actually was creating art just because I was fighting Alzheimer's. I would say to young Black artists, get the training, get the education, get the skills, learn how to market yourself, get that in schooling. And then put together some portfolios and try to get them out to some various galleries and art centers, etc. One of the things that I just did, which I had not really focused on, was, you know, set a website up for yourself and market yourself that way.
Thank you, Arlene. I have a kind of long question here. First of all, I have just quickly let you know that Rena said, your art and passion allowed us to hear about your personal history. Thank you for sharing and educating us. And then I want to move on to some questions here from Rosie. Where are you based? As artists seem to be on the forefront of enlightening others, how do you think it would be best to share your story and work with others? If you had the ability to share in any venue, what would you choose and what audience would you choose? There's kind of several questions in there.
Whoa, so you're gonna have to break them down for me. I'm not gonna remember all of them, so yeah. Give me the first one.
Well, that's easy. Where are you based?
I live between New York and North Carolina. So in New York, I have a studio at the Clay Art Center. In North Carolina, I have my own studio here. So I work between the two. Right now, I'm actually physically sitting in North Carolina.
And the second question was, how do you think it would be best to share your story and work with others? And I think that follows on to the next question. If you had the ability to share in any venue, what would you choose and what audience would you choose?
So I'm still adjusting to the idea that, you know, people like my art. And so I'm I'm still working through in my head, you know, how far out into the art world do I really want to go? Remember, I started this not to start a new career. I started this to fight Alzheimer's. I ventured out a little. I've done 3 Harlem Fine Art shows. I've been surprised at people's reaction to my art. So I've got, I think, a decision that I've got to make about, you know, how far do I let this go, you know, with it headed towards being me having a responsibility to keep producing art, to put it out in the world. So I'm not sure where I go. This was interesting. I'm glad I did this tonight. It's a message that I'm glad I got the opportunity to say. Am I looking to do a bunch of speaking and touring? No, because doing that means I can't be in my studio playing in my dirt. And that's what makes me happy right now.
I know you've been working on your own website recently, Arlene. Can you just give out the website address?
It's earlenecox.com, EARLENECOM.com.
Okay.
And you can write to me if you like at info@earlenecox.com.
Message from Marina. Arlene, can you talk about the powerful program you started with people with Alzheimer's?
So that's Rena knows that's my baby. So when I started doing this, I realized I thought it was working for me, doing art, doing something that was like totally different from anything I'd ever done before. Because I have this theory that your brain is like a muscle. You either use it or lose it. And we use such small proportion of our brain. You know, we decide that we are right-handed left brain or left-handed right brain, which means that we pretty much neglect the other side. I started doing the art because I'd been a lawyer, you know, finance, all of that stuff. And art was something I'd never done ever. I mean, I've had no formal college classes or anything in it. And what doing art does is it makes me use the right side of my brain, and sculpting requires that you use both hands. So it means that I'm using the left side of my body. So I came up with this. It seemed to be working for me. And so one day I thought, you know, there are just all these other people that have Alzheimer's that this could probably help. And so through my Links chapter and through the Clay Art Center, I was able to start a program at the Wartburg, which is this huge senior living facility in Mount Vernon. And for last 3 years, we've been running a program where we have an instructor come in. We bring all Alzheimer's dementia patients in. My Links sisters come and they work one-on-one with these patients, and we teach them art. And I've had the actual wonderful experience of watching people come in barely able to lift their hands. And after going through this program for about 9 months, they're holding a brush and trying to paint. And so it's just been great. Clay is just such an incredible medium.
Thank you, Arlene. Somebody asked you to state your website name again.
It's EarleneCox.com. EARLENE.com. COX.com. It's my name.com.
Message from Joe Orlando. Thank you. Your words are just so compelling. I do wish so many more could hear you in this way. Your art is beautiful and disturbing, but mostly thought-provoking, not your regular lawyer.
Thanks, Joe.
I do also want to let people know that we are recording tonight's event and we are going to share it in our library later on. Let me just see if there's any more questions here. From Diana, looking at your work was very emotional. How did you feel as you were creating the different pieces?
The pieces were sometimes emotional. The shackle hands, when I was sculpting my lifelines, got very emotional. The hand with just the single hand with the shackle, you know, I go through all kinds of stuff. And what I went through then was I couldn't put the shackle on my hand. So it gets very emotional because this is personal. I was trying to talk it through with my kids and got very emotional, and they were like, well, you can't do that on the presentation, but so it is very emotional. All of this is just very, very personal to me. And in case you didn't get that tonight, it is very personal. Each piece is very personal.
Thank you, Earlene. I see some people have asked about the piece behind you on your wall. They'd like to know a little bit about it, and they'd like to know what kind of artwork inspires you as well.
The joke between my husband and I tonight when I said I wanted this in the background was, you know, someone's going to ask you if you sculpted that. I did not. What this is a, and I'll move so you can see it. It is the most beautiful carved door to a chief's hut or house that came from Africa. It's an antique. And there's a guy in New York, I mentioned to him one day, you know, I really want a door. And my husband, of course, looked at me and said, to do what with? And he found this door for me, but it has the most intricate carvings I've ever seen on one of these African doors. And what was the other end of the question?
Let me see. I think it was just, oh yes, what kind of art inspires you?
I'm inspired by African-American art and by African art. I will tell you that before I started doing art, we collected art for years. I mean, this is one of the pieces that we collected. And it gets to be really funny when I did the Harlem Fine Art Show for the first time. You know, there are galleries where we had been purchasing art from, and the look on the gallery owners when they came by and realized I had an art exhibit was absolutely hilarious, because it was like, wait, so in their mind, we've just lost the customer, which is what I told them. I'm not buying any more art because I'm making art and I have nowhere to put it. So that's what I buy. I buy paintings. I've got African drums. I've got one stone piece, lots of paintings, because we were mostly buying paintings initially.
Thank you, Earlene. We do have a lot of comments here thanking you for tonight, and a lot of people found your presentation very inspiring, very honest tonight. I do see one raised hand from Al. Let me just see. Al, I'm going to open up your microphone.
Can you hear me, Earlene?
I can. Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and you know that I'm such a huge fan of what you do. It's truly inspired and inspirational. Your art is truly genius work, and I'm glad you featured my African queen.
I did, and your the talk.
Yes, the talk.
Mm-hmm.
And we love you, Earlene. And I do want you to know that I continue to believe that you truly have high potential.
Thanks, Al. That's an IBM joke. Thank you.
Al. Thank you for that. I don't see too many more questions, Arlene, so I think we're going to start winding things down.
Can I just say thank you to everyone for, joining, for listening, and for your questions, and most of all for your encouragement. So thank you.
And Arlene, I'd like to thank you for taking the leap of faith and coming on here with us tonight. I knew you could do it, and I knew you had a powerful story to share. Everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for making donations. The donations made tonight will be shared between Black Lives Matter and Clay Arts Centre. This presentation will be available in our virtual library pretty soon. And thank you so much, Arlene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.